Finding steals in your fantasy draft is ultimately going to raise the ceiling of your fantasy football team entirely and also enable you to make big swings and big trades during the actual fantasy football season. So if you are looking for the top draft steals right now, make sure to go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support because I'm getting into the best of the best. So getting into our first guy right here, I love this price so much for Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs right now on Underdog is the running back 10 and a 24.8 ADP. So with Josh Jacobs, he's my running back 4 if you went to my last running back rankings video, and nothing has changed in between that time and where we're at right now. Now, what's really wild to me is after a top 5 finish that he had just one season ago in 2024 with 275.5 fantasy points in a half PPR format, this is where he's being valued right now, and it's almost like people have thought that they've made moves. Like they're going out and getting a different running back, man. He's got some competition now. Really, nothing's been changed in Green Bay's offense. He was one of only 6 running backs in 2024 with over 300 carries. And the next closest running back to him in carries in Green Bay's offense was Emmanuel Wilson with 103. Now, that's actually not a bad number there for Emmanuel Wilson. So what you could kind of gather from this right here is that Green Bay definitely did want to have a different running back in their offense, provide them production, and not just have it all on Josh Jacobs' hands. But again, no moves have been made by Green Bay this offseason at all to acquire different running back talent. Now, I think that there is going to be some more Marshawn Lloyd involved. And if you don't remember, Marshawn Lloyd was I believe, 4th round pick for the Green Bay Packers, or 3rd rounder maybe, in the 2024 NFL draft. And he basically missed all of last season. Like, he was irrelevant. It was a total disaster. Nobody cared. And he was not even seen dressed because he was injured. So I think that there's going to be emphasis on trying to get him involved, particularly around training camp and having him be involved in the 2025 season. But here's what's big about Josh Jacobs that I really love and why I'm still targeting him again. Now, in weeks 1 through 6 last year, if you remember that time, that was actually the time frame where Josh Jacobs was the running back 21. And a lot of people were discussing, should I trade Josh Jacobs? Should I trade for Josh Jacobs? And I was kind of at a loss for words because he was handling so much volume, but he just wasn't getting in the end zone. And then weeks 7 through 18, everything changed. Running back 4 over that stretch. Tied for 6th in total carries in fantasy football. And he was fantastic to end the season in fantasy. He was getting, 16 plus fantasy points per game. The guy was a dominant running back for your fantasy team. So Green Bay, essentially what they did was they realized that they needed to ride Josh Jacobs to the absolute end because Jordan Love was already dealing with injury. He was not performing as well himself. So there was basically this big push at the end for him to, become more of a run-centric team. And I think Matt LaFleur adjusted really well to that with Josh Jacobs. And he's got the running back for it. The chance to shoot above ADP here at the running back 10 price point and right at the back of the second round is enormous for Josh Jacobs. Again, my running back 4, 270 plus carries and goal line work is absolutely going to be in store for Josh Jacobs again. On a top 10 projected offense in 2025, I think this is a great price for Josh Jacobs. Now, getting into my next player right here, I really love Jalen Hurts this year as well in drafts, and there's a lot of things that are kind of coming together here. Like, it's not like he's some super value, right? Jalen Hurts is the quarterback 4 on Underdog with an ADP of 50.4. So it's not like, again, he's experiencing some ridiculous discount here and he's going to be like an 8th round pick. No, but this is still pretty low for a player like Jalen Hurts who has top 3, top 2 production and potential at the quarterback position to give you 350 plus points in fantasy football. This is a guy who's done it in the past. He's my quarterback 3 heading into 2025, and he was the quarterback 8 in 2024. So that's what's really kind of driving this price down for Jalen Hurts this year because it was his first time outside of the top 5 since 2021. So again, that was a big issue here. So this is something I've not been shy about. Like, I've been very anti-AJ Brown to start the season. I'm not the biggest fan of Jalen Hurts' throwing ability. I don't think that he's the greater throwing quarterback than a Lamar Jackson, right? I don't think he's even close to the same level as a Joe Burrow, a Mahomes, a Josh Allen, those types of guys. He's just not in that same class. But what was big was in 2024. He had a huge statistical change in his throwing in 2024. In fact, if you look at his numbers, like that was the big change there, was his, he had a career low in attempts, career low in yards since his rookie year in 2024. So it was a really bizarre year for Jalen Hurts because obviously we all know that the rushing upside and the capability is going to be there, and it always has been there for Jalen Hurts. But this is just a bad precedent here that he had in 2024. And he also had the lowest passing touchdown total since his second year in the league. So again, all around, just a bad production year for Jalen Hurts throwing the football. And that's what led him to a quarterback 8 finish in fantasy in 2024. So obviously, like I said, the rushing upside is still very, very, very much there. The tush push has actually been legalized yet again. So they live to see another year of Jalen Hurts getting 16 plus rushing touchdowns right at the goal line because they're coming in behind him and he's got a 600-pound squat that he's going to drive himself in as well. So Jalen Hurts is still going to get tons of carries on the ground. And again, what this essentially does is it keeps his floor very high. So obviously, if you draft him at the quarterback 4, that's not conducive for a quarterback 8 price, a quarterback 8 finish that he had last year. But here's why I believe Jalen Hurts' passing volume actually does increase in 2025. So I've been discussing this with several people this offseason. I've had people comment on videos that I've been discussing with personal friends of mine. And something that's been bothering me has been the discussion of Saquon Barkley, right? And obviously Saquon Barkley had a staggering 378 total touches in 2024. Now, the argument has always been like there's just no way that he can sustain that level of production again. They're going to have to lessen his workload if they want to keep him healthy. And I've always thought that was true. So what I decided to do was I ended up going back to 2014 and going through running backs in each of those seasons since 2014 that had at least 350 touches in a year in fantasy football. And I wanted to see what the following year the volume was like. So I'm not going to go through all these guys right now. Essentially, the biggest takeaways that you need to gain is 100% of them lost volume. All 18 of these running backs, all of them lost volume the following year. So there's a 100% chance Saquon will lose volume. The number 2 thing, 94.4% of those guys, they drop below 350 touches. So again, it's almost impossible to get 350 touches back-to-back unless you were Zeke Elliott, who impressively did it during his career. The other thing, 88.9% of them lost 60 or more touches. So again, the chances that you're going to see a really big drop-off in touches, it's going to be pretty significant. So Saquon Barkley is statistically and historically at a disadvantage to even sniff within 60 touches of 378, which he got in 2024. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is this. Let's say that the Eagles really just want him to be their guy again this year, and they give him the same amount of volume or more. Well, all players who increase touches on a per-game basis the following year after a 350-plus touch year, all of them got injured. Every last one of them. So essentially, that just tells you that NFL players, their bodies will break down after this massive of a workload. So if my opinion is this, I know I'm not the only one who knows this information. I know the Eagles have to know this information. It's a very smart coaching staff, very smart personnel group. They have to know that they cannot increase Saquon Barkley's workload in 2025. So what I think is going to happen is this. Some people will say it could go to Will Shipley, right? Will Shipley could be way more involved in 2025, and he ends up being a good RB2 in drafts, actually. I actually think that Jalen Hurts is just going to throw the ball more. Jalen Hurts is a quarterback that has done very well on a completion percentage basis. He still does have really good weapons as well. I believe that it was kind of a dip in his production for passing in 2025 because they had a new shiny toy with Saquon who was ready to just totally boom for them. I think this year they kind of reined those in a little bit, get Saquon a little bit less touches, get the ball in Jalen Hurts' hands a little bit more, and he will zoom past a quarterback 4 finish. Now, dropping out to our next guy right here, this is one of my favorite picks in underdog best ball drafts right now, Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle is the wide receiver 32 on underdog, 57.1 ADP. Now, again, he's my wide receiver 18, so I have him ranked significantly higher than what his ADP is right now. And again, it's also very important to note this on Underdog. These are wide receivers that always are going to be more valued than in redraft formats, but Jalen Waddle's wide receiver 32 ranking is likely going to go over into ESPN drafts, on Yahoo drafts, on sleeper drafts. Jalen Waddle is the guy that I've been talking about all offseason so far. I love it. I love this price. There's a lot of reasons I do love this price right here. This is Waddle's lowest price in his entire NFL career. He came in as a rookie and was immediately the wide receiver 1 in this Miami offense, and he got a bunch of targets to back it up. So people were already hyped about him coming into his rookie year. Then what happened in his second year is Tyreek Hill came over, but he was still valued as a good wide receiver in fantasy drafts, and he actually ended up coming through on that promise as well. So what I want to do personally here is to kind of discuss why I love Jalen Waddle is by start tearing down Tyreek Hill. I know that sounds negative, but we need to just get this point across because I've done it so many times this offseason already because this really, really matters. This is a guy with Tyreek Hill who is in his 30s now. He's had 6 seasons as a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football. Research that I've done over the last 11 years now at this point has indicated that there is a ceiling here for these wide receivers, which is 6 consecutive top 12 seasons as a fantasy football wide receiver. Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, those guys had 6. And those are better wide receivers, arguably, than Tyreek Hill. Now, Tyreek Hill had 2 different consecutive runs. One 2-year run, and then another 4-year run that just ended in 2020. So now that it is ended in his 30s, these are 2 important pieces to note. 1 out of 3 of those guys who ended their run at the age of 30 or after returned to be a top 12 guy. So it's not likely that Tyreek Hill will join that list. And then the other important one is that nobody, not a single wide receiver over this time frame, has started a 3rd run as a top 12 wide receiver. So I really do believe that it's very, very highly unlikely that Tyreek Hill is a top 12 guy in 2025. Now, that does not necessarily mean that Tyreek Hill is going to be irrelevant in this Miami offense. It also doesn't mean that Jalen Waddle will be a top 12 guy again. And I'm not even particularly saying that right here. But one thing we do know is Jalen Waddle does have that upside. He was the wide receiver 7 in 2022 with Tyreek Hill. This Miami offense was on fire that year statistically in fantasy. Now, again, I'm not even saying that he's going to be that productive again. But what I am saying here is that we have seen from Tua the ability to support top-tier wide receivers in fantasy football when he is fully healthy. Now, that is also a big ask as well, considering his injury history and the fact that if he gets one more concussion, that dude might be done. But Jalen Waddle's upside at this price point, at the wide receiver 32, 51.7 ADP, it's well worth the price because in reality, this guy has top 15 upside. I'm just ranking him at top 18 because I do still see things that could go wrong. But at the price that you're getting him at, it's well worth the price. And the next guy up is also my second favorite guy to draft right now in Underdog. It's Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker is literally right there in the same ADP range as Jalen Waddle. So I can never get these 2 guys on the same team. Because Kenneth Walker is the running back 19 with an ADP of 58.3. He's my running back 13, so I've got him ranked 6 spots above where Underdog has him right now. Now again, this is one of my favorite picks on Underdog along with Jalen Waddle. Kenneth Walker, one thing that people just kind of really overlooked after 2024 was he quietly was a top 15 back in fantasy points per game. Now, top 15 is nothing to go, screaming home about to your mom or your dad or whoever doesn't play fantasy football that you got a huge steal, right? This was not a Chuba Hubbard type of season that Kenneth Walker had in 2024. But he finished as the running back 28 because he missed 6 games in 2024. Now, I think it's really important to note this before I move any further with my positivity for Kenneth Walker. Very important to note that Kenneth Walker has declined in fantasy finish and efficiency every single year of his career. His best year has so far to date was his rookie season. Every single year after that, he's dropped in yards per carry and in fantasy finish. He has been 15-game guy until last year when he had 11 games on his schedule. So, Kenneth Walker, there's issues here. I think that's very, very concerning. But I think it's also equally important to note that Shane Waldron was his offensive coordinator for the first 2 years. If you do not know Shane Waldron, this guy has the creativity of a doorstep. He's an idiot. This guy is a total disaster. Nobody cares about him. He's out of the league basically at this point. Not out of the league, but he's just not an offensive coordinator anymore because other teams know he sucks. This guy ruined a lot of good stuff in Seattle. So then they get Ryan Grubb in 2024. Now, this is actually an offensive coordinator that I liked, particularly for the passing game with Jackson Smith and Jigba. But there's no question that he was not a run-first guy. This guy didn't want to run the ball very much, and that's why they replaced him, ultimately, because they were bottom 4 in rushing attempts in 2024. They had 383 rushing attempts. With a healthy Kenneth Walker and a healthy Zach Charbonnet, that's unacceptable. Those two guys need to be getting the ball. So they move on from him. In comes Clint Kubiak, who was the offensive coordinator in New Orleans last year. And if you remember, before that they had injury after injury after injury after injury, Clint Kubiak was getting a lot out of his guys in New Orleans. This offense was just so bad in New Orleans that once they started getting injuries, he had no hope. So I hold nothing against what he did in New Orleans against Clint Kubiak. But this is what he said earlier this year when he got hired by the Seattle Seahawks. They're going to ask a lot out of Kenneth Walker early and often. So Kenneth Walker does appear to be unquestionably the running back one in this offense. And another thing that cannot be overlooked, Kenneth Walker's on a contract here. This guy wants to earn his money here. So I really do not think you should underestimate this. I really do believe that there's genuinely top 5 upside here with Kenneth Walker. And with Jalen Waddle, again, at that wide receiver price point that's basically around Kenneth Walker's, you're looking at two guys here with top 15, top 5 upside at the respective positions. So if you do want to get in on an underdog draft today, you could go down in the comments and grab the link that's there and use code FN to sign up for underdog. You could get in the Schnauzer draft, which is a $3 draft, or the Puppy, which is a $5 draft with a payout of $100,000 to first place. And they will match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 when you use code FFN. I won $19,000 playing underdog best ball drafts last year, so I think you should give yourself a shot at this big money. Now, jumping out to our next guy right here, I also really like this price with DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is the running back 27, 82 ADP in underdog drafts. Now, he's my running back 19, so I've got him 8 spots above where underdog is placing him in their ADP value system. Again, I love this price. Now, one of my most drafted players this year so far is DeAndre Swift. But I will acknowledge negatives here before I get into any positives with DeAndre Swift because I think they're very glaring. Now, while I do love Ben Johnson, who is the new head coach in Chicago, you cannot say that this has been DeAndre Swift's best situation. It simply has not been. He was with Philadelphia in 2023, and ironically, he had his worst fantasy football finish. He was a running back 23. That was the worst finish of his entire career in fantasy football with the best offensive line and arguably the best offense. That's inexcusable. It's disgraceful, as a matter of fact. Maybe he's just not that good. I've always said that about DeAndre Swift. But here's the deal. I actually still kind of believe that same thing. I don't think that he is that good. But here's why I like him in 2025 fantasy football more than I've liked him probably since he was a rookie. So he does get Ben Johnson, who, again, I do really like as an offensive mind in the NFL. Now, one of the first things that really good offensive coaches do in the NFL when they take over a team, Sean McVay did this, Andy Reid did this when he took over Kansas City, they invest and build the offensive line upon arrival. That's exactly what Ben Johnson did. They've got 3 new offensive linemen that are big names through free agency and trades. So they have absolutely overhauled this offensive line, which was one of the worst in 2024. He saw that need. He wanted to fill it immediately because it matters for both the passing game and the running game. So I'm very encouraged by what Ben Johnson has done as a coach. Now, they could have easily made a move at running back this year in the draft or in free agency or through trade, which might still happen, but they have not done that yet. They did not do it in the NFL draft, which was very running back heavy. So there's familiarity with Swift and Ben Johnson because Ben Johnson was there during Swift's last year in Detroit. Now, one thing that I really liked with Swift last year was that he had a career high in rushing attempts in 2024. But it was also a career low in yards per carry. It was his only year underneath 4 yards per carry. Swift has typically been a very efficient player. So there's probably not much of a coincidence there when you have a low yards per carry and also your highest amount of rushing attempts. Again, maybe he's just not that good. But I think that there's 2 options here. It could have very easily been a coaching philosophy with Shane Waldron. Again, a culprit here as the offensive coordinator. Or it could have been bad depth behind him. Either one is possible. If it was bad depth, though, they did nothing to change it. So DeAndre Swift, theoretically, if Ben Johnson and an improved offensive line give those same amount of workload or even close to it, he should see an efficiency drive up. So that essentially would mean a top 15 finish is 100% in the cards. So I really do like DeAndre Swift at this price. I think it's super, super low to the point where I think it's well worth taking the shot on for a top 15 potential guy. Dropping down to my next guy right here, I've got Josh Downs at the wide receiver 49, 92.2 ADP. I want to say this right out of the gate. This is more of a best ball pick right here. If you're planning on drafting Josh Downs in a redraft league, I would probably tell you to look somewhere else. I don't think that he's the most effective redraft wide receiver in 2025. The big fat elephant in the room on this one, undoubtedly, is Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, and not only Anthony Richardson, the other alternative is Daniel Jones. So they have one of the quietly worst quarterback rooms in the NFL. Now, I agree with that entirely. But one narrative that I have seen with Josh Downs is that he was not good with Anthony Richardson. So essentially what I did here was I took every game that he played with Anthony Richardson, and I found that he has averaged 9.2 fantasy points per game with Anthony Richardson. So that's not great or anything like that, but that's also not a bad number in a half PPR format. But at the wide receiver 35, which is again where I have him ranked, that would basically be around that 10.5 yearly average that he did end up averaging in 2024. So he is very, very close to that number if it's a full season with Anthony Richardson. Now, let's say just for the sake of argument that it's going to be Daniel Jones, right? Nobody needs to tell you that Daniel Jones is not a great NFL quarterback, but he has had a 61% completion percentage every year of his career, above 61%. Now, that's not a good NFL number by NFL standards, but it's much better than Anthony Richardson, who is still in a paltry 50% range. So that's an automatic upgrade if you go with Daniel Jones as opposed to Anthony Richardson from a completion percentage perspective. And Anthony Richardson is not exactly a guy who's been well known to hit on these tighter routes that Josh Downs likes to run. He's been known to hit on guys like Alec Pierce who go deep. So this could be, in my opinion, a more explosive version of Wan'Dale Robinson if he was to get Daniel Jones as his quarterback here. And Wan'Dale Robinson had 140 targets last year with the New York Giants. So I really do think that there's a good shot that Josh Downs finishes above his price. Because if he was a top 38 wide receiver in drafts, I wouldn't have much interest in him. But being that he's the wide receiver 49 in underdog best ball leagues, the potential for him to shoot up 15 spots above where he's being drafted is 100% there. Dropping down to our next guy right here. My tight end that I really love drafting this year is Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram has a tight end 9 price point with 110 ADP in underdog drafts. He is my tight end 6. Now, I went through Evan Ingram on a different video that I did just last week. And that video was about bad values in drafts and players you need to avoid in drafts. Now, I compared him to the guy that I don't like in drafts, TJ Hawkinson, because their price is so drastically different, but I think the results are going to be similar, if not Ingram outperforms him. Hawkinson is on an island on his underdog price at an 84.1 ADP at the tight end 5. He's got no tight ends within 12 picks of him. So essentially, you have to wait a round or two to go get a different tight end, or you got to go take TJ Hawkinson if you want a good tight end. A good tight end. I don't like TJ Hawkinson this year. I'd rather wait for Evan Ingram at the tight end 9, who has a better quarterback, Bo Nix, has less target competition in Denver, and Sean Payton has a really long history with tight ends and good fantasy production, dating back to Jeremy Shockey. Jeremy Shockey, for several years with New Orleans, top-tier tight end production. Jimmy Graham, this is one of the best fantasy tight ends in the last 20 years. And then Kobe Fleener even had some fill-in years without Jimmy Graham that were really, really excellent as well. Bottom line is this. Payton wants a good tight end. That's why they went out and targeted Evan Ingram in free agency. This is a guy who absolutely has top 5 upside if he can come back from his injury last year. And again, at a tight end 9 price point, it's so worth the shot to get a potential top 5 tight end. And my last guy that I want to go through today is also another best ball-centric pick because I really like Roschon Johnson out of the Chicago Bears. Running back 51, 167.8 ADP. Now, he's my running back 38. Now, there's a big price jump right there, right? I've got him 13 spots above where he's being drafted. And Roschon Johnson's price on underdog drafts has actually risen up over the offseason as well. Again, I want to reiterate, not a redraft pick. This is a guy that you could get on the waiver wire. And stay tuned, by the way, for the waiver wire because I've got a massive announcement coming within the next couple of months. But Roschon Johnson's the guy that you could get on the waiver wire. And I like Roschon for very similar reasons that I like DeAndre Swift. Ben Johnson is the head coach. Improved offensive line immediately upon arrival with the Chicago Bears. And last but not least, he covets the 2 running back system. He wants to use that like crazy. His first year as the Lions offensive coordinator, he had DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. Both of those guys were top 20, top 25 fantasy backs. Jamal Williams ended up being the better end of the stick because he had 17 touchdowns because he was their goal line back. Then they got rid of both those guys in 2023 and got Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Obviously, a huge upgrade in talent right there. So the bottom line is he likes to delegate what his running backs do. He wants a Jahmyr Gibbs type, a DeAndre Swift type, to be able to get between the 20s carries and to also get a ton of receiving work. But he wants his Jamal Williams type, his Roschon Johnson type, to go out there, get him short yardage downs and pick up yardage, and then also get in the end zone on goal line touches right here. So I'm not going to say, and I want to make it clear, I'm not calling him a better or as good of a running back as someone like, a David Montgomery or even a Jamal Williams. But I also want to make this clear too. I'm not saying he isn't as good as either of those guys. Let's go through Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson had 6 touchdowns on 14 red zone carries in 2024. So that's nearly a 50% hit rate to get in the end zone with goal line / red zone opportunities. He was limited mainly to goal line and short yardage down situations in 2024. Now, you can see that it's reflected in the yards per carry. He had a very low yards per carry. So that would indicate to you, if you just looked at that from a surface level, this is not a running back you want to target. But here's what is important to keep in mind. In 2023, which was his rookie season, he averaged 4.3 yards per carry on 81 carries. What was his running back room like then? That running back room consisted of Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman. In other words, a much more open competition for his running back 1 spot, and therefore Roschon Johnson was getting tons more, between the 20s open field opportunities than he did in 2024, where he clearly played second fiddle behind DeAndre Swift with a clear role. This is a guy who does have ability here. I just don't think we've ever seen it really shine through because he's been limited with opportunities and bad offensive line play. Again, the Bears have made no moves at this running back room right here. So unless they go ahead and get a J.K. Dobbins or a Nick Chubb or something out of the blue within the next couple of months, they seem like they're pretty comfortable rolling with Roschon Johnson here. So in Ben Johnson's system, with this improved offensive line, a running back 51 for someone, in my opinion, has top 30 upside is a huge steal in my mind. So let me know what your favorite picks are right now in 2025 drafts. And if you want to see the worst picks to stay away from in 2025 drafts, click on this video right here.